Good day, everybody. Steve the Amateur Historian. And hello, Mutt. The video that I'm doing today, I originally planned on just making it another Historic Murders of Portland episode, but I really wanted to, when I really, caught on to the context of what this story was and how it's astonishing to me that this is something I didn't know even existed. I've never heard this mentioned before, didn't know it existed in the annals of Portland history at the time that it did. And that made me want to add some even more context about this particular event, which is a cold-blooded murder, but it's a murder under certain circumstances. Now, lots of people, in terms of how we regard school shootings, a lot of people kind of regard the beginning of it becoming, what it is today, which it seems to just be getting progressively worse and worse and worse. Was in 1979, there was a teenage girl named Brenda Spencer. I want to say she lived in San Diego. I could be wrong about that, but she lived right across the street from an elementary school, and one day she used a gun that she had gotten and just started firing in the direction of the school as, kids and personnel were leaving for the day. I believe she killed the principal and the custodian there. I think she wounded a few kids, and when people asked why she would do such a thing, she was famously more or less quoted as saying, she's been quoted as saying, I don't like Mondays, because it was a Monday when it happened. She was also reportedly quoted as saying, because Mondays are so boring. And that people kind of regard that as kind of where school, this idea that someone would just one day just live their life and then the next day pick up a gun and start shooting at children of all people. And look at where we are today. However, Brenda Spencer, that was hardly the first school shooting in the history of America. There was a story out of the 1920s. There was a man in the Midwest who really lost his mind and actually bombed an elementary school and killed a massive number of children. And that's kind of regarded as kind of the first mass killing of people, or of children in a school, even though it wasn't a shooting, but it's kind of in there with it. And that was in the 1920s. And there hasn't been a lot in Portland, in the state of Oregon. They have happened. A few years back, Reynolds High School, there was a shooting. Reynolds High School is kind of over towards Troutdale, east of Portland. I fortunately never had to experience that. Elementary school, middle school, high school. I remember I saw when I was like in 4th grade maybe, all of us getting rushed into buses, and they said we were going to go on like a little trip. And then we just parked like 2 blocks from the school around the corner. And we just sat in those buses forever. We later found out that my school had gotten a bomb threat, and they were just shuffling us out of there without telling us, so, there wouldn't be panic. But no school shootings. And when you look at the history of Oregon, again, they have a couple months ago, Park Rose, a guy showed up at school with a gun. Whether he was intending on using it or not is still kind of left up for debate, because it appears he showed up. I think he only had 1 bullet in the gun. He had ample opportunity to pull it out and shoot someone and didn't. But he was, jumped, disarmed, and fortunately nothing terrible happened. But that just happened a little while back. And of course, there's the couple years back, end of summer, me and my girlfriend had gotten back together after being broken up for a couple of years, and October 1st, 2015 was when we decided to make it official, like to let the world know. Post it onto Facebook, it was going to be our day. posted it, started getting all the likes, started getting the woohoo, they're back together. And within an hour of making that Facebook posting, the first report started coming through that there was a shooting going on at Umpqua Community College. And we all remember that, even if you're not from the area, the Umpqua Community College shooting. Pretty much as I was posting this stuff to Facebook, that event was starting to take place. So needless to say, the restarting, if that is a word, of my relationship quickly took backdoor to the events, the serious events of the day. And that's a major recent one, but I also remember being in elementary school, and especially today, a lot of people don't really know about this case, yet at the time it was openly regarded as like the worst school shooting in history because of the number of people wounded. I think only 2 were killed at the school, but I think more than 10 were injured. And that was the case of Kipland Kinkle, who went to Thurston High School, which is just east of Springfield, and Springfield's right next to Eugene. They're kind of twin cities together. And, Kipland Kinkle obviously had a lot of problems, and he had an interest in guns, and he got busted at school with a gun, and as a punishment, his father took his guns away from him. Or at least he thought he had taken all his guns away from him, because something in that period of time made Kipland Kinkle snap, and in the aftermath he claimed it was voices in his head. But he would ultimately, shortly after this altercation with his father, he would come out and gun down his father in their own home, and then he waited for his mom to come home, and when she showed up he killed her dead too. This was the night before he went to Thurston High School and opened fire on a bunch of kids, a bunch of fellow classmates in the cafeteria. And I don't think his parents were discovered till after that. Once, Kipland Kinkle pretty much opened fire and was quickly gang tackled by people in there and apprehended. And then it was discovered that his parents were also dead. And there's this, you can probably, I know it's in some documentaries, you can probably, I don't know, you can maybe find it on YouTube, I don't know. But there's this, it is, especially when you look at the full context of what happened, there's this really creepy police footage that they took of them going into Kip Kinkle's home and looking for his parents. And he had apparently he had the soundtrack from the Leonardo DiCaprio version of Romeo and Juliet that he did with Claire Danes, and the soundtrack, this operatic, dramatic music, was blaring full blast as the authorities walked in. And so you have this video of them walking around, and they're finding like the dead bodies of Kipland Kinkle's parents, and there's just this, pounding operatic music playing in the background. It's really disconcerting. But the reason a lot of people don't really remember Kipland Kinkle in terms of school shooting is the following spring is when Columbine happened. And Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold by far eclipsed what Kip Kinkle had done. And even today, everybody knows what the Columbine shooting was, even though it's been 20 years. My God, 20 years. Jeez, and while I'm talking about shootings of certain types, I just passed. I had to pause because you kind of see it right here. There's a gathering of people that I can only assume is in relation to. There was a recent shooting. I'm sorry, I'm going off subject, but that just happened. I vlogged about it briefly before I really knew the details, but there was a man who was clearly troubled, and the police gunned him down, and it was in front of one of these houses right here. It was right near this intersection, and gunned him down, and he was an African-American guy. So, it's, people try to act like race doesn't play a part. Well, how come You know, things like that continue to happen. So that was, even just passing by and listening, there was a woman speaking. I don't know if she was a relative or a representative in some way, but I can only assume it's in relation to the shooting, since they're literally a block away from where that happened. And they had some banners, and I saw something about community and police. It just constant tragedy. Here I am, about to bring you another one. But like I was talking about, the school shootings as they are today, obviously they're seen in a different light than they would be, you know, several decades ago. Charles Whitman was a guy, seemingly normal, all-American boy, climbed up to a tower at the University of Texas in 1966 and started, you know, he was trained with a rifle, he had military experience, he started picking off people from the tower. If that happened today, we'd be stunned, but we'd almost be desensitized after a couple of days. And part of that is, you know, social media. We're so overwhelmed with, you know, over sensory just constantly these days. But yeah, something like that we'd be almost desensitized to after a week or two. But back then, that, you know, blew people away because it wasn't that common. It was a different time. So you'd think school shootings that happened, you know, even pre-1960s, school shootings were so incredibly rare. Like, you know, you think a school shooting that occurred first half of the 20th century would garner a lot of attention, no matter what the circumstances, no matter how many people died, no matter what the motivation was for the shooter, whether it was intentional or whether it was an accident. You think an event like that would be widely remembered, and yet I've never heard this story until just last week. Never seen it discussed in any newspapers, any documentary, anything history related to the Portland area. Never heard about this. I stumbled onto it by chance while I was doing historic murders of Portland research. And what I'm talking about is a school shooting, a bona fide school shooting that happened in the city of Portland in 1929. Steve the Amateur Historian. And I'm now in North Portland, walking along, well, just starting to walk along Mississippi Avenue. And I'm just a couple blocks away from where I want to be. I'm heading to the site where, as far as I can gather, the first real school shooting occurred in the city of Portland. And, you know, as far as qualifying, you know, what qualifies as a school shooting? Well, the event has to happen, you know, at least as far as how I'm calculating it, the event has to happen on school property, has to involve, you know, people, usually students of that school, or students that are of a, you know, public schooler's age, you know, 18 or under, usually. Which actually, now that I mention that, is an interesting stipulation in this case, because this is a story where we have a school shooting. One student shoots another. but they went to different high schools. And whatever way you shake it, I haven't found any information about Oregon school shootings that predate the 80s and 90s, much less something from the late 20s. So I've never found another story that predates this one. So as far as I'm concerned, this is the city of Portland's first ever school shooting. This here is Jefferson High School, named after Thomas Jefferson, of course, located in North Portland, and a school with actually a very intriguing history to it. It's always been, you know, on the racial grounds of, well, Portland's really bad racist past. For many decades, this has always been regarded as like the black high school. I mean, it really has. Which mostly started around the 1920s and 1930s, almost through like forced yet legal segregation. The city of Portland and its, real estate developers and real estate agents started forcing all of Portland's African American population to live in Albina, and then it kind of spread, but it was always kind of spreading in North Portland. And so being, one of only 2 schools in North Portland, along with Roosevelt High School over in St. John's, it was inevitable that as more and more people of a certain color were forced to live in a certain area, that the populace of this high school would represent that. And so the school's always, all the racist monikers go with that, as a dangerous school, as a gang-laden, overwhelmed with violence, so on and so forth. And I want to say there was a shooting that happened here in the late 80s in the vicinity of the school, but you see it's definitely an older school, and there's been so many efforts made in the past, I think going back to like the 60s and 70s, to try to close this school down. And well, as you can see, it is still standing, which is really good for this school that's had such a tumultuous history and so much disrespect thrown its way. And it's so interesting that this school is kind of regarded as a haven for all kinds of racist stereotypes you can say about black people. Again, gang violence, gun violence, danger in general. And what's so interesting is the story I'm about to bring to you happened right inside this Portland high school. And it actually involved a bunch of white kids, because it was still the late 20s. And this area was still predominantly white. Right, and I'm circling around. It's lined with bars all around the football field, which is so interesting because most schools you can easily access their football field and the track and kind of be in the vicinity of the school and whatnot, but the whole backside over there, I didn't see any way to get in. So it may just possibly be completely fenced off. So I was hoping, you've got like the main entry right over there, and I was hoping to maybe get up close and personal with that, but I may just be circling this place. Yeah, I think I'm out of luck. I've seen like 2 entry points, but they both have like gated doors that are closed off, which is interesting because there's a door right here that's wide open. to this tennis court. It's wide open, and then there's another door over there that's open. So, again, there's nothing saying I can't come in here. I just find it interesting that there's like a pathway in and a pathway over there. Then again, I didn't try those gates to see if they open, but I've been generally just able to walk through there and actually get on the land. So it was a little bit more. I mean, I've never seen a high school in this area where you couldn't access this area during off hours, much less during the summer. But here I am, where this story took place. God, it is so quiet out here. It's almost menacing. But, I mean, here's one of the main entrances. There was one I passed by over that way. In the case of this particular story, there was a young man who didn't even go to high school here. He went to Benson Polytech, which is a couple miles south of here. And he was a young man, 16 years old, named Walter Fink. F-I-N-K-E. I'm pretty sure it was pronounced Fink. 16 years old, and didn't even go to school here, but he became enamored of a young woman who did go to school here, who was named Mildred Knott. K-N-O-T-T. Now, Mildred Knott was 16, same age, but she was seeing an 18-year-old guy named Herbert Beam, who attended this high school. And there's no real description as to how these two met. I'm talking about Fink and Knott. However it came about, Walter Fink became obsessively enamored of Mildred Knott. I don't know, I'm getting weird vibes in here. It's so quiet. It's so, I don't know. I'm gonna exit. I don't know. I'm just getting weird vibes here, like I'm being watched or some weird stuff. But yeah, Herbert Beam became obsessed with Mildred Knott. Sorry, Walter Fink is becoming obsessed with Mildred Knott, who was seeing Herbert Beam. That's the dynamic that we're working with here. And it seems, based on the information given, Knott was never really interested in Fink. So there wasn't a reciprocation of affection there. But when you become obsessive, you can convince yourself of a lot of things, and I think Walter Fink thought he was entitled to Mildred's love, to her attention, and that he was better for her than this other guy could ever be. So he became very obsessive. He didn't even know Herbert Beam, never met him, just knew that he was the guy that the girl he was in love with was seeing. And, you know, like most crazy people do, he started threatening her and making threats against him, a guy he's never met before. So it was a very, very, very dangerous set of circumstances that were being played with here. And again, this guy went to Benson. He didn't even go to high school here. So I'm very interested in finding out how these two met. Now it's May 20th, 1929. Walter Fink purchases a firearm, handgun, from another guy who went to Grant High School, which is another high school that's in Northeast Portland. So you have 3 high schools ultimately, hey, how you doing? Ultimately tied into this thing. And after obtaining a weapon, he came to the school here and he went to the office and had Mildred summoned to the office under the guise of he was posing as her cousin. Like, hey, I'm a relative of hers and I want to see her. Can you ever come to the office? I have something for her, because he did have something for her. Not what you'd think, considering the circumstances. But no, he posed as her cousin and had her summoned to the office in the school here. And once she arrived there, he had this collection of letters. I think it was love letters that he had written to her or she had written to them. I heard it reported both ways in the newspaper, that they were from him to her or from her to him. It doesn't really make a lot of sense that they would be from her unless he had fabricated them in his seemingly deteriorating mental state. But whatever the case, that seems to be what was going on. Was there were probably letters from him trying to, I don't know, win her over one last time. Seems to be the possible dynamic. And she was freaked, and she said in the aftermath he was behaving very erratically, and she fled the office. Now, she had to have told office personnel there that this was not her cousin, this was a guy that was obsessing over her, that she was creeped out by. Like so many others, she said, I never thought he would actually do something really horrible. But still, you'd think she would have immediately been like, no, this guy's not my cousin, this guy's posing. I'm not uncomfortable with him. Get him the hell out of our school. You'd think that would happen. Even in the 1920s, when security is probably a lot more laxed. Another random point of entry. I wonder how old these are, these things. No dogs on school grounds. Well, I'm not a dog and I don't have a dog, so I think I'm fine. But yeah, this is kind of the back side of the school. The front end is pointing towards North Killingsworth Street, and the back side here is more pointed towards Alberta Street down there. I'm still surprised how just dead quiet it is. Yeah, you'd think that a guy shows up, lies to office personnel about being related to a student there, just give them some love letters. I don't know what's going on over there. You'd think school personnel would be like, okay, young man, I don't know who you are, but you need to get out of here. This kid should have been escorted off the property. He really should have. But by all accounts, Mildred Knott flees from the area, and he, I don't know, wanders away. He's just allowed to wander. I'm just taking all this in around me. He's allowed to just leave the office and just kind of wander, you know? He's apparently wandering the halls, I don't know, ruminating, whatever the state of affairs may be. And yeah, that's what's happening. And it seems to be midday. Mildred Knott gets away. She ultimately goes to her 6th period class. She's probably thoroughly distracted. Mildred is meeting Herbert Beam in the corridor of the high school between 6th and 7th period. And as the two are meeting in the corridor, seemingly a brief rendezvous before they have to process on to the next class at hand, suddenly Walter Fink appears in the corridor. He's been looming, you know, in the school for a while, and he has a gun on him. Still never met Herbert Beam in his life. He approaches the two. He obviously sees Mildred talking to a guy, and he walks up, looks at the man, asks him, you know, hey, are you Herbert? Herbert responds yes, and to what should be nobody's surprise at this time, Walter Fink systematically pulled the weapon from his, you know, wherever he was concealing it, and shot Herbert Beam 3 times right in this school. I don't even know if you can get a real good view inside of it. Some stairs leading up somewhere in there, wherever the corridor is in this great big school. That was where Herbert Beam was gunned down. And then Walter Fink, as is so often the case, took the gun he had and he turned it on himself. And after firing point-blank range into another human's body, killing him on the scene, he attempted to do the same by firing a bullet into himself at point-blank range. And as always seems to be the case, Herbert Beam, the real victim, died as a result of his wounds. And despite firing the gun into himself at point-blank range, Walter Fink was rushed to the hospital. He didn't die on the scene, and after about 48 hours he was restabilized. He was in stable condition, and the moment he was brought to stable condition, he was charged with first-degree murder. However, there was a lot of controversy. I mean, there's still controversy about people under the age of 18 committing massive crimes and whether they should be charged as an adult or as a juvenile. And this is 1929, so the understanding of whether someone who's 16 should be charged as an adult or as a youth was even more primitive, considerably more primitive. So there was a lot of controversy. There was the people that said, oh, he's only a kid, he didn't know what he was doing, he was confused by the thought of love, and if he was older he would have understood it better and he would have taken better action, but he's still just a youngster, don't ruin his life by putting him in prison. And then there's the people that are like, he's 16, he was old enough to know better. I think he was overwhelmed by love. He was obsessed. That doesn't make someone insane. Don't you even try to pull an insanity defense. You need to take responsibility for what you did. There's a big difference between being 16 years old and being 6. And what you did is not something that we can give you a slap on the wrist for just because you don't happen to be old enough to vote or old enough to smoke or drink alcohol. Doesn't mean you're a little child that has no concept of the actions you're taking. So there was a lot of butting of heads, and I think ultimately the case was put in the hands of juvenile court, not just for them to, it wasn't just he was automatically going to juvie, but it was more they wanted them to kind of come to a decision. They kind of dropped it in their lap, and it was kind of like, you tell us what we should do. And ultimately it did end up back in legal court. He wasn't just sent off to juvie for a long time. It was put back into the court system, and he was ultimately convicted of second-degree murder. And of course, when Fink restabilized, he had the classic story, I didn't want to shoot him, I just wanted to scare him. But then he walked in, and for the first time he actually saw Herbert Beam, and he saw him and the love of his life, Mildred Knott, together. And his vision went red, and he just lost his mind and went into a state he couldn't control. Momentary insanity. It's the classic thing you say before going to court, because you can say, I was temporarily insane. And that he snapped in that moment. When the description of what happened, he casually walked up to him and said, hey, are you Herbert? And he said yes, and he shot him. The fact that he had threatened Mildred's life, threatened his life, just because Mildred didn't think he was serious doesn't change the fact that he made threats against both of them. This was brewing, and it seemed very premeditated, so this guy was pretty lucky that he was able to get away with just a second-degree murder charge, when it seems, I think if he was 18, it would have been first degree, but because he was 16, they met him halfway. Didn't convict him of a first-degree murder charge that would have inevitably meant a death penalty. So Walter Fink was fortunate enough to be where he was at in life, and he was able to plead down from a likely first-degree murder charge to a second-degree murder charge for the shooting of 18-year-old student, I assume a senior, Herbert Beam, here at Jefferson High School. So his age inevitably saved his life, and I'm willing to bet, I wasn't able to find any information after his conviction, but I'm willing to bet that with how young he was, considering he was convicted and given a life sentence at the age of 16, it wouldn't surprise me if he was paroled long before he died and rotted away in prison. But that's a true story, everyone, of what happened here at Jefferson High School back in 1929. Again, as far as I can tell, Portland's first school shooting. And, it really is tragic that it had to happen at Jefferson, because Jefferson has been the whipping boy of Portland in terms of high schools. It's always had stigmas based against it. It's always been disrespected, misrepresented, and it's been easy to do in this city because in the most recent decades in this city, it's been a school that has less of a white populace than other ones. So it is a sad piece of history, but a history I felt needed to be represented because I never hear anybody talk about this. The fact that there was a school shooting that happened. It wasn't so much in the vein of shootings today, where a lot of them seem to be people who trying to get attention, trying to get revenge, shooting someone due to a love triangle happens, but it's not all that common. I know in 1997 in Pearl, Mississippi, there was a guy named Luke Woodham who got into Satanism, got mixed up in some real dark stuff, and ultimately he had a girlfriend and she broke up with him. They had a really bad falling out, and he came into school one day in 1997 and shot her and her friend down in cold blood. So it does happen from time to time, but it is really sad that it would have to happen at Jefferson High School, because for all the disrespect and criticism and racial hatred, racial stigma, racial disrespect that this school has faced, the number of times people have tried to close it down, the population fluctuations, all of that, it's still here, it's still standing, and it's still functioning in the capacity that it was initially built to be. So it's important. The last thing I want, especially as a lifelong Portlander and somebody who's, kind of ashamed. I was one of those kids that when I was in, middle school and high school, I was one of those guys that was like, don't go near Jefferson unless you want to get shot. I was one of those kids who would say that. I apologize if I had to switch over to my GoPro. I literally ran out of space on my iPhone as I was trying to do my conclusion, but what I was really just trying to get at the heart of was, this video is not being done to add fuel to the fire of the disrespect and misrepresentation that Jefferson High School has faced over the years, kind of being treated as the high school that underperforms. It's always been referred to as the ghetto high school, and it disrespects, all the people that went through there, all the people who their high school experience is the Jefferson High School experience, and all the strife. I've researched a lot of what was going on in the Albina area, especially in like the 50s and 60s and 70s, and all the racial strife and civil rights fights, and a lot of it was related to education, and the students who had their experiences at Jefferson High School during that time. I mean, Jefferson High School is a massive piece of Portland history, and it's not just a series of negatives. So I want to leave with that, because I don't want this to be I don't want people going into the comments section on this video and being like, haha, big shocker, shooting happening, and of all places it's Jefferson High School, ha ha ha. That shit ain't funny, So just refrain from that. This is just one piece of history. I'm sorry it had to happen at any high school in Portland, as well as Jefferson High School. So I just want to leave you guys with that. I have the utmost respect for the history of Jefferson High School. It's one of the most oldest high schools in this area, and it's a real massive piece of Portland history, Portland educational history, civil rights history, the whole bag. So just remember that when you're watching this video. And anyway, thank you so much for watching. As always, remember to like, share, subscribe, hit up my Patreon if you want to help me out that way. And till next time, thank you so much. This has been Steve, the Amateur Historian.